All right. Yeah, it's just really good to have you all here, visitors. Thanks for joining us this morning. Just want to throw this out here. I'm way too young to be a grandpa, right? I mean, look at me. I don't even know. Second thing, I was going to announce this last Sunday, but I forgot. Dan and Olivia and Carla are going to start being greeters. So if you for people coming in, if you want to join them, talk to them. They're going to kind of head up that part of our church. So thanks so much, guys, for doing that. And so why don't you guys raise your hand so if somebody wants to help you, if they don't know who Dan and Carla are. So. Third thing is just this. Man, what a tough week. Gosh. I got up yesterday, if you look at this, I got up yesterday morning early. For those of you who are here regularly, you know we're in a series in the book of Colossians, and had spent the week kind of working through our next section, and I got up yesterday, and I was sitting up, and I drove over. I usually, Saturday mornings, I have this weird routine. I'm one of those guys. I drive out to the bluff, and I sit there, and I get there long before the sun comes up, and I sit there and watch all that. And it was at that moment God said, yeah, you won't be doing anything in Colossians. I'm like, well, gee, thanks. So this is not a teaching time. This is not a sermon. This is just one from my heart, because my heart's broken this morning. It's going to be a tough one to get through, but I want to take another look at the guy riding on a borrowed donkey. I want to read this text. It's an odd text to be kind of connecting with some of what our church body's going through, and particularly the Gentry family. But let me read this, and then we'll get started. As he came to the towns of Bethpage and Bethany on the Mount of Olives, he sent 2 disciples ahead. Go into that village over there, he told them. As you enter, you will see a young donkey tied. There's no one has ever tied there that no one has ever ridden. Untie it and bring it here. If anyone asks, why are you untying that colt? Just say, the Lord needs it. So they went and found the colt just as Jesus had said. Sure enough, as they were untying it, the owners asked them, why are you untying that colt? And the disciples simply replied, the Lord needs it. So they brought the colt to Jesus, and threw their garments over it for him to ride on. As he rode along, the crowd spread out their garments on the road ahead of him. When he reached the place where the road started down the Mount of Olives, all of his followers began to shout and sing as they walked along, praising God for all the wonderful miracles they had seen. Let's pray. God, would you just be with us this morning? We're hurting, and we need your peace and your comfort in our hearts this morning. As we take another long look at who you are, help us to leave with more hope than what we came with, and an excitement for what the possibilities are that you can do in our hearts, even in tragedy. In Jesus' name, amen. Now, I want to set up this talk by just thinking for a little bit about what's going on here. Now, if you looked at this and said, well, that is a really odd day, it is. I'm going to be straight up and say, but I want to connect it with kind of this whole thing of hope. Now, what is going on before in kind of the background of this? If you remember, those of you who know your kind of the history of Israel. Israel has gone through a long time of not hearing from God, like 400 years worth of not hearing from God. And we can't even, to us, the idea of 400 years, it can't even be, I mean, it's just a number. How do you wrap your mind around 400 years of not hearing from God? Just silence. And then Jesus comes on the scene. And when Jesus comes on the scene, well, let me just back up and say that for all these generations, there is in the hearts of Israel, the people of Israel, the Jews, this hope that someday the Messiah is going to come. And when times are tough and when things were hard and when stuff was difficult for them, they kind of lived with this thing, someday the Messiah is going to come. But it's really hard to hang on to hope when it goes on and on and on. And see, not only do we, you don't even know anybody that's heard from God. It wasn't your grandpa. He was a good guy, but he didn't. It's been so long. It was just way back there somewhere. There was some person who heard from God. And so you have this thing going on. But they lived with this thing called hope that someday Jesus is going to come. And when we get to this text, Jesus is now, he's grown up, he was born, there was these stories went out when you guys know the stories. When he's born, there's these stories, and I think probably in the people of Israel and the people of that generation, they're saying, you know what, just maybe this is the guy. But then he kind of disappears, and he grows up, and then he comes and he starts his ministry. Now we're right at near the end of his ministry when we read this account. And I tell you, people are jazzed. Because this hope is now feeling like it's reality. Like, this may be the guy. Now, it's maybe difficult for us to think about that because our culture is so different, and we see things. But to be that group of people who wanted their own government and who were under the oppression, as they would have seen it, of the Roman government and that system, and who longed for freedom, and who were living, if you know anything about that culture and that time, were living in just abject poverty. It was just probably hard. And then all of a sudden, this Jesus, he's coming to town, and the people go wild. Can you feel the electricity in the air? I mean, they start yanking off their clothes, and they're throwing their clothes down, and they start tearing branches down, and they start throwing branches down on the ground. And here comes Jesus riding through. It's called a colt, but it probably was just a donkey. Well, that's kind of a downer a little bit. I mean, here's this guy, but he comes riding through, and the crowds are cheering. And the text said, if you read the entire text, it says that there's people that are coming into Israel for this celebration. It was the Jewish version of the 4th of July. They're coming in. They're going to have this big celebration. People are pouring down into Jerusalem. People are coming out of Jerusalem because there's this thing going on, and there's this hope finally that might be reality, that maybe, just maybe, Jesus, the Messiah, is here, finally. And then Jesus rides down into the city. Now, here's what I want you to think about. This is what we call Palm Sunday. 5 days later, Jesus is hanging on a cross. What do you think the people that were celebrating thought at that moment? Now, I'm probably one of the characteristics that I'm not especially proud of myself is the older I get, I have this fear that I'm getting more cynical. Does that happen to any of you guys? You know what I'd have been thinking? I have a good idea. I'd have been thinking something like this. I knew better. Because none of us like to get scammed. I have gone through my entire life, and I think I've only got scammed a couple times. And to this day, it just, one of them was, I own a timeshare in Breckenridge. I've owned that thing for probably 15 years. Does anybody want to guess how many times I've used it? I'd still like to find that salesman. I can almost see Friday night, people sitting around their in their homes, because remember, there was families got together for this celebration. There's these family units, and they're sitting around, and I can almost hear this conversation going on. I knew better. Why did I think a guy that rides into town on a donkey was the guy I was going to put my hope in? And to make everything worse, I mean, can't you hear these? That wasn't even his donkey. That's somebody in Bethany. There's a guy from Bethany trying to find where his donkey is. I knew better than to place my hope in him. Why did I ever think that guy was the Messiah? Now let me, as I talk this morning, I just want to bring part of my story in. Joanne picked up Corey, and we took him to the clinic, and the people at the clinic called for Flight for Life to come up, and I could not believe what was happening. And I would have thought that at a moment like that, you could have had some kind of a prayer to God that would have been something. You know what actually was happening inside of me? There was no prayer. There was just this desperate cry. Please, God. Please. Please. And when they wheeled him out to put him in the helicopter, I ran out and I squeezed his leg. And I just said something to him, didn't know if he could hear it. And then he flew off. A couple hours later, we get down to the hospital in Pueblo, and I jump out. My brother took us down as a family, drove us down. I jumped out, and there was a nurse standing out in front of the hospital, and I ran up to the nurse, and I just said, "Did Corey make it?" And the nurse said, "I can't tell you." And I said, "Please, did Corey make it?" She said, "I'm so sorry he didn't." You know what happened at that moment? Why did I ever trust the guy on the donkey? That was a borrowed donkey. Are you kidding me? See what happens? See what's happening in this text? These people have just had their hearts ripped out because they bet everything on that guy. And he's hanging on a cross. And they're sitting around saying, "Why did I ever trust him?" Haven't we all been there at some point? Why? We came out, probably 4 or 5 hours later, we got back home. This one rips my heart out every time I think about it. Tish is still a small person, but then she was not only small, she was young. And this is 8 years ago, so she was, I don't know what she would have been, 13, 11, whatever it was. Anyhow, when we took trips, Corey had his own little suitcase that he'd pack, and he'd pack his little suitcase and bring it down when we were ready to go on a vacation somewhere. Tish had taken that suitcase and put his clothes in. She was so sure we was going to bring him home. And we walked into the house that night about 10 o'clock. And we knew that he wasn't going to ever come through that door again. And she brought in that suitcase and said, "I thought for sure we were going to bring him home." How do you learn to trust the guy on the donkey when stuff like that happens? Because I tell you this, what happened to the Gentrys this week, what happened to our family, every one of you have a story you can talk about. Well, you bet everything on him. And there's moments where you sit down and in the quietness of the moment you say, are you kidding me? The guy on the donkey? That wasn't even his donkey. Why did I trust him? So, for the rest of my talk, I want to just give you a couple of random ideas on hope in this moment as we stand here. And I want to begin just by reading this. This is from the book Lament for a Son. Lament for a Son, and I wish I could think of the author's name. I forgot to write the name down when this is the dad writing the book, and the dad, his 25-year-old son was climbing in Europe, and this kind of, before we get into this part about hope, this is kind of how I felt. This is maybe how you felt because some of you haven't lost kids, but you've had dreams crushed. Like you were hoping that relationship would work out, and it didn't. You were hoping your kids would make better decisions, and they're not. You were hoping that marriage would last. You were hoping for closeness and intimacy, and it's not there. What are you going to place your hope in this morning? Lament for a Son. His 25-year-old son was hiking and then fell in an accident, a climbing accident. And here's just a little bit of what he writes. I have no explanation. I can do nothing else but endure in the face of this deepest and most painful of mysteries. I believe in God the Father. Believe on the guy on the donkey. I believe in God the Father, the Almighty, the creator of heaven and earth, the resurrector of Jesus Christ. I also believe that my son's life was cut off in its prime. I cannot fit those pieces together. I'm at a loss. To the most agonizing question I have ever asked, I do not know the answer. I do not know why God watched him fall. I do not know why God would watch me wounded. I cannot even guess. What I want us to do in the rest of the talk, what if we could go back out on the road and watch the guy on the donkey walk by one more time? What could we see possibly this morning to help us through these next days? Wednesday's going to be brutal for the gentry. Goodbyes are always hard. But for all of us, not just for them, for all of us, what are some things? I just want to three random ideas about hope, and then I'll let you go. Here's what I've discovered in my journey. Hope is for desperate people. Hope is for people who have figured out that they can't figure it out anymore. Jesus made this statement in the Sermon on the Mount. He said, and depending what translation you use, but it basically, his idea and the one concept is just this. You're a blessed person if you mourn deeply. Because when you mourn deeply, when you know the brokenness of broken dreams and broken hope, when you're up against the reality that I had these dreams, I had these ideas, I wanted it to go this certain way, and it doesn't, and you're up against your dreams and your hopes and what you wanted to see against the reality that you're facing, when that hits you square in the face, just maybe then the guy on the donkey will bring comfort into your heart in ways that you can't even imagine. You position yourself at that moment to receive something that only those who mourn deeply can ever receive. Hope is for the desperate. Before I move on to the next one, I'm going to just say this. Here's what can happen when our hopes have been crushed, when dreams die, when we have to surrender what we thought to what is. We run in danger. We run in danger of, in our desperation of somehow going out and approaching life in this way where, you know what, if I don't hope anymore, maybe I'll be safe. Have you been there? I don't know if I want to run the risk of hoping. So we try to build these kind of nice, cozy, safe little places to live in. But the problem is, who's going to be in charge of that place? Because if I can't trust the guy on the donkey, who am I going to trust? I have to pull it off myself. And we can get into self-protection. And maybe the greatest temptation we have is trying our best to impose order and chaos. I'm one of those guys who, I'm a list guy. Problem is I lose my list, but I do make them. They're around somewhere. And I say that to say this. The way my schedule and my life can be so chaotic at times that somehow it makes sense to me. And for some of you aren't list people. I make lists. Are there any list people here? You're a sick bunch. This is how far I take lists. There's times in a given day I will accomplish something unexpected that's not even on my list. I add it to my list so I can check it off. I was outside Thursday night doing some things, and I got a call, and it was a call from Pam and Mark, and they told me what happened. It was about 5:30, if I remember correctly, Thursday night. And I went inside, and we cleaned up, and Joanne and I went down and spent the evening. What do you say? What do you do? We went down to just hang out with Mark and Pam, and you know what I wanted to do going down there? I just wanted to be able to walk into the chaos of their life and bring order. You know the toughest thing about trusting the guy on the donkey? You got to trust him to bring order to the chaos. And man, there's times it doesn't feel like he does a very good job of it. I got to trust him. Let me go through these next two, and then I'll let you go. Here's the hardest part of hope. I remember some of the journey from March 14th, 2011 forward. One of the difficulties for me personally, and I don't know if it was for Joanne, but part of the anxiety in my life, I don't know if it was anxiety, I don't even know what it was for sure. Part of the trust issue, let's just say it that way, was Corey died between us. Could I really trust God and hope for the rest of my kids? Could I really? Was he actually going to be there? I want to just offer this perspective of Jesus, because when we talk about hope being vulnerable, there's only one thing as vulnerable as hope, and that's love. And there's only one person whose love is so vulnerable, and I don't think we see Jesus this way. Do you understand how vulnerable Jesus is in his love for you? Because he isn't some machine up there, some emotionless machine that's kind of pre-programmed all kinds of things and it's just happening. Do you understand this morning? He is weeping for the Gentry family. He loved Zach. He loved. His heart was broken. He loves you. And there's this verse, I just want to connect this with two ideas. Something Jesus says, something the guy on the donkey actually says to us, and then a verse from Revelations. He's riding into Jerusalem, and he stops the donkey, and then he starts to weep. And he says, "Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, I wanted to take care of you. I wanted to love you. I wanted to protect you. I wanted to gather, and you wouldn't let me. And you wouldn't let me." And then there's this verse in Revelation that this image comes where Jesus just says, "I stand at the door and knock." You know, one of the most vulnerable places we ever are is when we love deeply and we knock, hoping that the person inside would receive our love, not knowing if they will. So when hope feels vulnerable, remember this: Jesus' love for you is so vulnerable. He is so vulnerable in his love. It's outstanding the way he loves us. Because there's many times I heard the knock and I didn't open the door. Because I didn't know if I could trust him. Last, hope reorients our focus. There's this tradition that comes out of early church, the early church, and let me just describe it because it's not really connected with. It's connected with hope, but it's really neat, and I understand that there's some of the Orthodox churches still practices. I've never heard of any, but here's how baptism went in the early church. Prior to the actual baptism event where the person was put down and brought up, the person was asked to face west, and they would face west, which is somewhere that way, and they were asked a question 3 times, and they were asked to answer the same question 3 times. So as they're facing west, they were asked this question: "Do you renounce Satan?" "I do." "Do you renounce Satan?" "I do." "Do you renounce Satan?" "I do." Why west? West because west is where the sun sets. West because west is where the darkness comes from. This is how they thought. West because west is where aloneness, and that's when the cold sets in. So prior to being baptized, they'd face west. And then they'd turn east. And then they were asked this question: "Where's your hope?" And they would answer this way: "My hope is in Jesus. I'm united with him." Why east? East because east is where the sun comes from, where the sun comes up. East is where daylight comes. East is where the warmth comes from. East is where all of that, the new day, that's where that all comes from. And they would turn and they'd face east. One of the hardest things in this journey for me has been the decision to turn from west to east. To turn away from the pain. To turn away from the darkness. To turn away from the hopelessness. To turn away from the haunting feeling that somehow I made mistakes. And to turn back and with hope look back and say, "God, would you pour your light into my heart one more time. I desperately need you. Here's what I found. In the last 7 years of this freaking brutal journey, here's what I found. He's more amazing than I could have even imagined. When he actually does shine his light back into that rawness and that pain, and when you finally allow yourself to dream again his dreams, he's amazing. I know this is a really odd way to say it, but I've said this a few times, and hear it like I'm saying it, maybe not like it. I would never trade the God I know now for the God I knew before Corey passed away. I never would. Because he has come in, he's shown his light into some of the... He's just been amazing. Last night I was outside. And I was still trying to wrap my mind around this. I mean, last time I saw Zach, I was standing right back there where Jeff is, somewhere close. Zach gave me this. Remember those hugs? He was amazing. His face was just, he was so excited. And he had his Bible. And he said, Dave, you got to see the Bible he gave me. And he's showing me, and I think it was, I don't even really remember. It seemed like it said something about a recovery Bible or something, maybe. And he was showing me stuff. And he looked at me. And he said, someday I'm going to beat this. And when I do, I'm going to go out and help all of the other people who've struggled with what I've struggled with. And then last night I'm outside and I'm trying to make sense of, God, what in the heck is this? I come walking in the house at one point from whatever I was doing, and Joanne had the computer. Joanne had some music playing, and ironically, the song that was playing is, your praise will ever be on my lips. Here's what I know. When you finally turn away from the West and you turn east and let the light of his love and his warmth come in and heal the brokenness and all the stuff inside of you, there's only one thing you can do and say, you're an amazing, amazing Jesus. And I will always brag on you. I don't know where this talk finds you. Because even as I share my story, you might be sitting here saying, well, my story isn't anything like it. I tell you what, if you've lost hope, I don't care what the details are. I just invite you, as we wrap up this morning, to look deep inside and say, am I living with enormous hope? Am I living in the sunshine of his love, or do I still have my orientation west? Where am I? And then I just invite you to maybe think about what he wants to do in your life and how he wants to bring hope and healing back. Here's what I promise you. You can trust the guy on the donkey. you can. Zach's going to come, and as Zach comes, I'm going to invite any of the Gentry family that wants to come up. If you guys want to come up, we're going to pray with you as he plays the last song. And anybody else that needs prayer, there's a prayer team up here. If any of this is connected and you want prayer, just please come up and we'll pray for you.